My name is Barbara Obst, and I am a nurse and also an educator with Kennedy Krieger Institute. I'm with a grant program that is called the SNCC program, which stands for Specialized Healthcare Needs Interagency Program, and it's a collaboration program between MSDE and Kennedy Krieger. And we provide services of working with parents in the school setting, as well as in private groups, training educators, school nurses, and parents of how the medical diagnosis impacts learning. So thank you all for joining me this Sunday morning. And we'll get started, and I will take questions at the end of. So if you have questions as we go along, just put them in the chat room. Working with your child's school. So some of the objectives that I have is like the need for a 504 or an IEP in the school setting, understanding that the IEP and the 504 is a living document. Understand that accommodations for your child might change during the school year. And to understand that you, the parent or the guardian, are a major part of the team. So the biggest thing that I can say is the word share. And why is that? I don't feel that you have to give all the information, but I think what I have found over the years of working with schools and with school educators is that, and the whole school system, is that if we don't have some information that really helps them understand the medical diagnosis in a school setting, they're not going to be able to help give the services that your child deserves and what they can do. And so it is a process. And I feel that there are ways that you can have your medical team, when they prepare documents that need to be shared, that blacks out your past family history and is just more child specific. So it's really important in the beginning to identify a key contact at the school. And I know a lot of times is that in the beginning, when you're first faced with the diagnosis in a school with your child, is that you're working in a situation where you're first dealing with all this new medical information and you're overwhelmed, and you're gathering all this medical stuff and trying to understand what meetings and what services your child's going to need medically. And then on top of it, if your child is no matter what the age of your child is, there are services are available. So if they're younger than school age, there is still that child find program. But if they are school age and above, your child may never have had an IEP or a 504, and that's a whole nother language. So it's usually a good idea to have a good contact at the school. And I usually, for the IEP team, it's usually the assistant principal, and to get what we call the team together. But if you can communicate with one person, whether it be the assistant principal, the school counselor, the case manager, or the school nurse at your school, that really helps. You can ask to have a meeting with the educational team at the school prior to your child's return to school. And each school calls these meetings something different. Even in the state of Maryland, I work with 24 school districts, and each one calls it a different type of team. Some are called SST teams, which is Student Services Team. And this is the meeting, especially before, if your child's never had an IEP or a 504, that will pull together the appropriate members of the team. Prior to the meeting, collect information that you want to share at the meeting. So if there is someone that can, a physician that can write up a summary of what is going on with your child, that works really, really well. And with that information, if your child is also receiving PT, OT, speech and language, or any type of psychological testing or behavioral therapy strategies, all of that can be brought to the meeting or submitted prior to the meeting. And there are certain things that a lot of times the school likes to be prepared, but also you want to be prepared. So if they have as much information as possible in the first meeting, and you're going to be going to a couple of meetings, but if you can have all that information given copies to the schools, that really, really helps them so that you can go forward with your first meeting. Getting ready for the meeting. So I know it's really difficult with families that I work with, because especially when it's a new diagnosis, is that the families are still getting used to what the medical team is telling you. And now you're trying to face, what am I going to do at school? So there are some pointers that we can use, that I tell parents that we can use when we come to the school setting, what they can do. So they're going to send you, the school's going to send you an invite to the meeting, and they're going to list all who they are inviting. Every school district has a type of free service. It's like a Partners for Success program, that there is someone that can help you navigate the system, that you don't have to first go out and quick get an advocate. There might be an educator that is assigned to your, if your child was in a rehab hospital, sometimes there are educators there that actually help with the transitioning and sending all the information in. But it really is important to take someone else that can hear what is being said at the meeting. Because what happens is, when you go to these meetings, and I'm sure some of you have been faced with these meetings, it's you and maybe someone else, and then the rest of the team. And sometimes these rooms get up to 12 people being in a room, and you just feel totally overwhelmed. Plus, they're talking their own language. If the school does not know your child, which happens sometimes, is one of the tricks that I have learned and that has worked with the family, especially if they have, if your child has been at a preschool program and now they're transitioning into a elementary school setting, is I bring a picture of my child. There have been some times that at the meeting, I have actually brought the child to the meeting and then had a family member take the child back out, so they're not at the meeting the whole time. But I want them always to put a face with your child. Organize your thoughts. So it's like preparing for, like, doing a homework assignment. So you want to talk about what you think your child's strengths are. You can talk about what are your concerns about the child coming to school. And you can have your list of questions. You can also think, what supports do you think they really need, so that your child can gain and level that access to education, so that your child can be successful. And it does help. I always say it really is important to have the school nurse. And when you want to make sure that it is an RN that is coming to the meeting, but you want to have the school nurse there to explain in simple terms about how the diagnosis affects your child. And that is really, really key. Preparing for the meeting, make sure, like I said, to have the school nurse there. She is considered in the IEP 504 process. She is the expert regarding medical. So that is important. She needs to, she or he is able to gain the insight that they know what resources they need to have to contact. Be aware, like I said, there will probably be many people at the initial meeting. So bringing along someone that can take notes for you and listen, that is really, really helpful. And write down your questions ahead of time. Some schools are really good about setting an agenda. Others do not set an agenda. So you can, even before the meeting, if you have heard that your school isn't very good about setting an agenda, you can write an agenda for them of what you want to do. it is helpful for the team to know what your child's day looks like when they are not at school. And why do I say that? Well, I know a lot of times with the families that I work with is that their child is also getting outside services. They are going to a physical service, physical therapist. They are going to occupational therapy. They might be going to speech and language. They might have numerous doctor's appointments. It might take now for your child to do some just regular care of getting ready for bed. It might take a lot longer than what a child of typical age would be doing. So it's really important for them to know what your child's and how much work it is to get your child into school. You know, what is it? It's not like you can say, oh, just go and get ready, go get dressed. You might actually have to go there and help them, depending on the age of your child or depending on if there was some disabilities that were left residual, depending on the medical diagnosis. So again, it is really, really important that they know what your child's life looks like. And maybe they are totally spent, like even that you notice that their stamina might not be the same and that they are, tired, that they need to take a rest period. So that again is really, really important for you to share that. And I just put this picture up at the table, but I have been in meetings where there have been 12 to 15 members of that they brought a team in for team meetings. So IEP versus 504. So depending on after the initial meeting, they will determine whether or not your child is eligible for an individual education program or do they just need accommodations? And that would become a 504 plan. Both of these are living documents. So you as a parent can ask to, just because it requires just once a year that they meet to review the 504 or the IEP, you can call a meeting and a lot of times when we have an initial IEP or even a 504, I usually say to the team, I would like to come back to the table 6 to 8 weeks after the start of school. And the reason being is that you don't want to wait a whole year to see if the accommodations are working. And this also gives time for the school to really it gives them enough time that they're starting to know your child and we can make some what I call tweaks to the IEP or the 504. Some families, we do quarterly meetings, and that is something that has worked out well because the child is changing all the time. And so that is really, really important. So again, they are both legally binding. This is for public schools. If your child is going to a private school, they usually do not have IEPs or 504s, but they might call it an accommodation list. And so again, you have to be aware of what your setting is. But when I'm talking IEP and 504, this is mainly for public schools. So how do you create then that fluency, especially if your child is receiving therapies in and out of school? So the one thing that is really important to remember is that school therapies like PT, OT, speech and language, behavioral therapy are geared towards the school setting. So a lot of physical therapists and occupational therapists is what does that child need just to be in the school? So if your child is also receiving services outside of the school setting, it is really important that we don't have overlapping goals and that we want to establish that communication because a lot of times the private therapy might be more for activities of daily living in the home setting and strengthening and all of that. I have had that the physical therapist, if your child has to use, they're not going to work on strengthening the legs or whatever. If they can get into the school building, that is all they care about. So again, it's really, really important. It's really, really important with behavioral therapists. If your child is working with a behavioral therapist on the outside, as well as that they have a behavioral therapist on the inside, is that they are speaking to one another, because it is really, really difficult for children to work on two sets of goals. So we want that the wording is the same and that they understand that is the same, because if not, the child is going to feel overwhelmed in either your home setting or in the school setting. So again, having that communication between therapists really does help. And I have found on the whole that many school therapists, the PTs, the OTs, the speech and language, and even the behavioral therapists, if there is a behavioral plan at school and you have a behavioral plan at home, we want to make sure that we are using the same language and we are not having so much thrown at this child to try to change the behaviors, because we usually can only change one behavior at a time. You can ask the school therapist to give you suggestions for supports that you need to help with homework. And I know now in the virtual world that a lot of us are living, it is much more difficult. Many of us are not trained teachers or educators, and we are in that role, sitting with your child and trying to keep them on task virtually. Some might be in hybrid, that you're running, you go to school maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and then you're home and switching to virtual. And again, that can be very confusing. And also, for some, it works well, for others, it doesn't. We have found that for virtual learning, some children are doing really well just virtual, because the other behaviors that might have been interfering at school are not happening now. So that is, one thing, but creating, and so they will ask for you to sign releases. And again, they can only talk. The one thing that I have heard families say is, I don't want them knowing everything that's going on. It is going to be, you can actually have it that you can talk about this, this, and this. So you can control what they are sharing. And most of the time for PT, OT, speech and language, and behavioral therapy, the more open the communication, the better it really does work for you and your child in the school setting. So what are some of the accommodations that might be helpful? Well, depending whether it's an IEP or a 504, the one thing that I think is really important, because one of the things with an IEP and even with school attendance is that if you have a lot of absences, um, this is a concern. So we want to have, like in Maryland, we have what's called wraparound services, and it comes under the chronic illness thing. So we ask that it be included, that anything that the child is missing at school, that they will do the teaching. And so sometimes what happens, if you know your child is going to be out, or they're only coming to school a half a day, we then want an educator to come to the home to work with the child. And so it sort of comes under what we call here in Maryland, it comes under home and hospital. But normally with home and hospital, you have to wait at least 2 to 3 weeks. This way, if your child, which is a long time to wait for your child, and all that missed learning, so that makes it much more difficult depending on the grade of your child. So the one thing that is really important with chronic illness, and when you have that wraparound services, if your child is out for more than 2 days, that a home and hospital teacher will automatically come and work with your child. And a lot of times they're able to assign someone that then really knows your child. Extended time is one thing that we can ask for, but we have to watch with extended time because it can actually be a snowball effect that you have extra time to do a homework assignment or to for tests. So again, it's something really to look at of, is it increasing anxiety the extended time, or do they just need chunking of materials, of things being presented in small bits and then you go on to the next, or breaking down the assignments. A modified assignments is that you're still covering the same materials, but instead of doing 10 questions, you might only have to do 5 questions. A flash pass, or just having a pass that you need if your child needs to go and get up and move, or needs to go and meet with an adult for support. Sometimes that really works. For those, and that's really good for children that have increased anxiety, is that we identify adults that this child feels comfortable with in a school setting that they can go to. Check-ins. I have used check-ins a lot with children that have increased anxiety. And it's as soon as the child comes into school. I had one student that we could tell literally when the child got off the bus. If this girl's hair was not brushed and combed like she normally appeared, that was a visual clue to the educator that was meeting her outside, that it was time, let's just see what's going on. So again, you can establish what's called check-ins, and it could be once during the day, 2 or 3 times during the day, but it's a way that the child feels connected. A lot of times, some students might need an area to go and calm themselves. And so it can be within a classroom or it could be outside of a classroom. And again, I said accommodations for virtual learning. Again, that is really, really important. I mean, everyone has gotten a Chromebook, but we, at least in this state, they are giving out Chromebooks for the virtual learning. But again, you have to make sure is that screen, that's sometimes a very small screen for your child to work with. So again, also, who is going to be supporting your child during, has the IEP reflected now in a virtual learning setting, or the 504 accommodations, are they there to help? Assistive technology accommodations. This is mainly in the school setting, but there might be that they need copies of notes. They might need a keyboard. They might need different types of how you take tests. Is it easier for your child to verbally say what's going on? Or is it easier for your child to do it on the testing on the computer? So again, it's asking for an assistive technology accommodations. So some key points. You are a member of the team. And yes, it is all brand new as far as maybe talking to the, knowing what all the lingos and all the abbreviations mean. They will give you a book at the first meeting. You feel like you're signing away your first child. And they give you, like, I know the Maryland book, I think, is over 32 pages long, telling you about your parents' rights. And you receive one at every meeting, but it's really important for you. And that's why it's really good, like, really to talk to someone if you've never done the IEP process or the 504, to really talk to, like we have here, a Partners for Success. Some states have parent groups that are very supportive, so that they go through that. There is also online, there's Rights Law, that you can read a book that is written for parents. And they also run seminars of how you learn how to do your own IEP meeting, that you can really be a team. Communication is really essential, and it's starting from the time of hospitalization and how it's going to be for getting ready for your child to transition back to school. And I know sometimes with families say, it's really hard to even think about your child going back to school, but really school, that's their normalcy. Okay. That is where they are 6.5 to 7 hours a day. Take someone with you to your meetings. You want to really try to be as prepared as possible. And it's not, it's a learning curve. So don't beat yourself up if you feel, oh, I don't know what to ask. Really have a clear understanding yourself of what's going on with your child's, how does your child's medical diagnosis impact the learning? What are the doctors telling you? What are they saying? What do you have to look for? Remember, the IEP and the 504 is a living document and it can be changed anytime that a meeting is called and if they feel they need to make a change. Accommodations might need to be changed 6 weeks into it. They could be changed during the year. So it never should be one accommodation or two accommodations, and that's it. As your child grows, as your child makes gains and everything, there might be other accommodations as the work gets harder or more difficult grade wise, there might be other accommodations that are needed. So I think we can open it up now for questions.